So I'm Dakota Smith with Woodworking Network. Today
Okay.
I'm joined by Greg Simon at Veneer Technologies and Fred Mitchell, Columbia Forest Products. Today we're talking about what goes into veneer grading and why it matters for everyone from cabinet makers to distributors and what attendees can expect. So let's start with the basics. I know you talked about that a little bit, but what makes veneer grading such a specialized skill?
I would say because it's not black and white. There's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of debate. You can look at every piece and you can have a 10-15 minute debate on it, but there's just not enough time. And in order to do that, you have to kind of go with your gut. There's a lot of specs to each sheet that you do, depending on the grade, depending on the species. There's a lot of different variables, but I would say that you're dealing with an imperfect product. So you got to make the best of what you can. A grade, white oak is not all going to look the exact same. You're going to have some variables in there. You're going to have some color variations. You're going to have some, some small inconspicuous knots that are acceptable. So I think the important thing is kind of talking about that gray area that people aren't necessarily familiar with, and that's still acceptable, in these grades.
I guess if you look at it, Dakota, it's a science and an art at the same time.
Mhm.
It's a natural product. The art piece of it is that nature has created a beautiful, tree, and it allows us to process that tree in a manner that each sheet is unique in its own way. By taking that artistic piece to it with the sciences we know how to process that log, we can present, unique looks that's pleasing to the eye. It also allows us to maximize, that tree or that valuable natural resource that, that's always sought after, that perfect tree that we could stretch it out so a lot of people can enjoy the looks that it produces. And I would say that with that, it comes some of the natural characteristics it's inherent in a lot of those trees out there, that by allowing us to reassemble and put it in certain designation or grades, we're allowed to accentuate those natural characteristics. Some people may want a cleaner look. Some people may want to look with more natural characteristics in it. By doing that, and we can combine the science and art together to produce those looks that our industry is sought after.
So across our industry, across the supply chain, why is it important to understand that process?
So to me, it's important to understand this process because you know what you're buying, you know what you're getting. It's not a plastic product. It's not going to look identically straight. Each piece is going to, change because, slicing of a log, you're going to have a different variation. And let's say white oak rift, I think, we previously talked about that being one of the most popular species right now. And not all white oak rift is going to look the same. It's not going to all, be perfectly straight. It's not all going to be, no red or no pink. You're going to have some of that in there. And I think, to me, it's important for the industry just to understand, what you're dealing with at the beginning end. If we keep, picking and choosing exactly what we want, at some point these leftovers, they need to be moved, and needs to be understood that it's acceptable in the marketplace. And for a high-end profile job, that's a different story. You're pulling 10, 12, 50 pieces, and it needs to be perfect. Understand, architectural, that's a different ball game. But for your standard kind of run-of-the-mill, your A grades, it's important to understand that you're going to have some underlying variables in there where things can change.
Because Greg, you can chime in time, but it's all about that. We got to educate our industry about that. It's more to it than just the A grade or the perfect looking sheet of veneer. There are other looks out there that's important, that people, in our industry needs to understand, even down to the end user. It allows us to move the mix of the entire tree. Because one of my things that I always say, that that I believe in that three-legged stool, that if one leg is faulty, then it won't be sustainable. So in other words, it has to be good for the customer, has to be good for the actual, manufacturer that's producing these sheets, and it has to be good to people who are taking those sheets and making, another product such as decorative hardwood plywood out of it. So in other words, to be good for the customer, good for the decorative plywood market, and good to the decorative hardwood slicing veneer market as well.
In terms of business, 'cause that's usually who we see at these type of shows is business leaders, and then we even see designers and everybody in between. Um, how can understanding veneer grading help those businesses grow, or help the businesses that have been grandfathered in per se adapt to this new market they might be getting into, or a market they might already be established in?
Well, I would say that for the people who are just entering the market, it'll be important for them because they're introduced to the wide spectrum of different species that are out there, anywhere from the exotic species to the more, I'll say, domestic or traditional type species. It'll allow them to see that, hey, I can, by seeing these looks, up close and personal, it may guide them to, hey, we want to use this species for the next, our marketing efforts, or design of furniture, or this design for, this particular room, as, depending on the certain accents they want to put it in. For the veterans in there, it's just a reminder to them that, hey, we need your help, out there, that look at the wide array of different looks and grades that are available in our industry. So let's remember, as we're introducing people to the market, help us explain what's going on out there, or what's available out there.
Yeah, I like that, Fred. I think, we talk about it all the time, kind of with that gray area. It's not gonna all look the same. It's not gonna all be exact. You're gonna have a mix, a mix of different looks and appearances and colors, and an A grade. And I think it's good to show the mix of grades, like Dakota, like, we discussed, it's all, it's important to move the mix, and, showing these other grades that are out there that are available. People might not know about it. And, I think it's a crucial part to our industry to move the mix and discuss the mix.
Okay. In terms of demand, for example, the popularity of white oak versus something I believe Greg mentioned last time was cherry. Are there any particular species or grades that are harder to source right now that might be more or less valuable to those distributors or designers?
Believe it or not, as I look at it, white oak is the one that comes to mind, the most. I know there's a lot of looks that we've heard, I would say, in the layman's terms, straight grain oak.
Mhm.
That's the one that's out there. Um, in the initial beginnings, the supply was tighter. Um, lead times, were longer due to the great demand. But I think our industry has responded, beautifully, and showing up proper inventories in the market. So, you know, with that collaborative effort, we was able to continue to satisfy our customers through the scarcity of raw materials, now to a point where the inventory is good in the market. But what we're finding out is that in our industry, we provide a look overall. And that look we were seeing is what, I coin custom grades, where they're looking for a particular color of a particular species, a particular look without a certain natural characteristics. And I'll say that as we go more towards that, it's not inherent in one particular species, but it potentially can be spread across many, several species, depending on the customization that they want. You know, I don't know, Greg, if you're seeing that same thing out there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's absolutely what's going on. Yeah, especially with those, like you said, your custom grades. I'm sure you're creating more and more custom grades as the years going on. People are getting more and more particular with what they want in that market. How many specs can you add to one line, especially when it comes to the old white oak straight grain, the number one item there.
Yeah.
Speaking about the seminar that you guys are both hosting, lastly, what do you hope attendees will walk away learning after your seminar?
Well, I will say I hope they find it a very, educational experience that they're walking away with. One, there are a lot of species out there to choose from. Two, that there is a varied of look, and we classify that by different grade designations that we all abide by the ANSI specifications. We hope that from our talk and the ANSI specification, they got a better understanding of what's allowed in certain grades, what different natural characteristics to expect in certain species. To walk away with when they talk to their customers, they got a better understanding of what they're talking about. Instead of showing a particular picture, oh, this is what it looks like, if this is what you want. But based on that, they can say, hey, yes, that's a great look, but based on what, I can now know, this may be the better option for you of what you're trying to do. So, passing the education forward of giving them the right knowledge to give them to answer real industry questions.
And Greg, how about you? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Fred's gonna nail it every time, but I think that's the biggest thing that I hope people take away. Being able to answer those important industry questions that maybe they not necessarily know. Talking about those range of grades and like Fred said, talk about those natural characteristics that are allowed in these grades. So to expand their knowledge and also hearing what they have to say. They're on the ground. I'm just just work at a face plant. So I don't have my ear to the ground as well as they do and see what they're hearing in the market and the feedback that they're getting. So I'm hoping to learn something as well, and I know I will. And but yeah, I think talking about that range and delivering that information to the end users is I'm really looking forward to it.
All right, thank you guys so much. It's clear that Veneer touches every part of our industry, from sourcing to sales and everything in between. So I want to thank you guys both so much for taking the time out of your day to attend this call with me. You can catch Fred and Greg at the Veneer Grading Seminar. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.